Greetings, gaming citizens. Generic gaming journalist Mike here, and I am here in Jeff Keighley's basement. I've been busy putting together my June event for the gaming industry that's all about gaming industry events. I call it the Electronic Event Expo, or E3 for short, and I am so glad that name was available because I have no idea what else I would call a gaming event in June. To kick things off, we're going to have a pre-show where we talk about all the events happening in the industry in the month of June, including a world premiere of a sci-fi, free-to-play 5v5 hero battler that looks suspiciously like Overwatch and Valorant, but we swear is completely original. Then, on June 7th, we'll have an exclusive interview with Jeff Keighley, where he just reads off of a list of video games that start with the word Kingdom that aren't Kingdom Hearts, just to piss off a few people on Twitter. Then we'll close out the show right after whenever the last gaming showcase is, so that we could say we covered the entirety of the gaming events in June, just to boost our journalistic credibility. Now let's take it over to Mike the Ferret to talk about digital gaming events. Greetings, gaming citizens, Mike here. Gaming events are something I'm a sucker for. Every year I go to PAX East in Boston because not only is it close to home for me, but it's a 4-day weekend where I can be unapologetically myself around tens of thousands of other gamers. Instead of being the weird guy at work, we're all the weird guy at work, which makes us not weird at all. I will always tell people that, socially speaking, there just is truly nothing like that kind of environment, and I maintain that stance despite the lack of deodorant I've noticed over the years. However, those are conventions. Their purpose is more geared towards consumers and general fans, so we may have to revisit that subject in a future video. If you want to see that, let me know down below. In this video, however, I wanted to talk more about official events hosted by game developers and publishers and industry icons like Summer Game Fest. For those not in the know, Summer Game Fest is somewhat of a modern E3, hosted by Jeff Keighley, who is also the host of the Game Awards. It's a celebration of games that goes for a few days in June, with the headlining show kicking off a few days of back-to-back game presentations. It's a fun time, though it admittedly lacks a bit of the charm that E3 used to have. Oh, but Summer Game Fest is not where it ends, not by a long shot, because everyone and their mom has a game presentation in the month of June. After looking at a calendar of gaming events from Gematsu's website, I started asking myself the question that turned into this video. Are there too many gaming events? Don't get me wrong, I love stuff like Summer Game Fest. Hell, I've said several times how I'd be down to be a co-host or present an award at the Game Awards because I love this event so much. I'll address that earlier question in a moment, but before I get into the main point of this video, let me quickly recap how the industry got to this point of all these digital game announcement presentations. Before the 2000s, aka the pre-Mike era, E3 was a solid week for all the biggest gaming companies to go to LA, host a press conference announcing what games were coming up in the next 6 to 12 months, then offer game demos for press and media to play and cover. It was structured very well. You had a distinct week to look forward to in June, where events would happen, and none of the presentations felt back-to-back necessarily. Each company mostly got their own day of coverage, with the only overlap really being Sony and Microsoft being the same day usually, but they were far enough apart that it wasn't overwhelming, and you did have a lot of third-party developers in between Microsoft and Sony, but again, it was spaced out evenly enough that there wasn't necessarily a ton of overlap. It wasn't until 2012 that someone decided to rock the boat. At E3 in 2012, Nintendo held their usual press conference, but it reportedly featured too much of a mix between Nintendo's Wii U hardware announcement and game announcements, leaving fans not a lot to be excited about. Due to server overload, the initial broadcast was basically impossible to watch, but the secondary viewership worked to popularize product promotion, according to then-president of Nintendo of America, Reggie Fils-Aimé. In addition to the 2013 broadcast, Nintendo also had daily live streams in the form of Treehouse Live, named after the localization department at Nintendo. Greetings, gaming citizens. Editor Mike here. I wanted to add a quick correction about what I said about Nintendo Treehouse Live. In the video, I said that in addition to the Nintendo Direct in 2013, they also did Treehouse Live, but this is actually false. I was mistaken in my research. They did a Nintendo Direct in 2013, but they did Treehouse Live starting in 2014, so that was a mistake on my part. Now back to the video. This was where Nintendo staff would demo games that were announced that week. I remember getting so invested in these streams, as it was the best way to see hands-on gameplay for games I was excited for from the people that actually worked on them. Plus, I don't really follow gaming news outlets when it comes to gameplay coverage, so this was my only avenue for gameplay demos that I was really fine with watching. The move to online presentations was a smart one, as Nintendo Directs became an event in and of themselves outside of E3. Nowadays, we have people trying to predict the Directs in February, June, and September like clockwork, including yours truly. It's hard to remember a time when we didn't have Nintendo Direct for Nintendo news because it's so normalized now. It wasn't until 2019 that other companies started to catch on, with Sony hosting the first ever digital presentation titled State of Play in March, clearly an effort to do what Nintendo was doing with their Directs. In the same year, Sony pulled out of E3 altogether, a move that was met with shock across the board. Remember, E3 had been going since 1995, so to hear of a major company pulling out of the show was unheard of. Fast forward to the COVID pandemic, and E3 was shut down since people couldn't gather in person. In comes Jeff Keighley with Summer Game Fest as a way to let companies still make their announcements so their presentations wouldn't exactly go to waste. Rather than just being the same 5 companies making presentations, Jeff has been gradually including more indie representation, with the addition of Day of the Devs, hosted by Double Fine and I Am 8-Bit. Fast forward to 2024, and now we have E3 officially dead, with Summer Game Fest only growing bigger as the June gaming event. Whether you're a fan of Jeff Keighley or not, you have to admit the fast growth has been pretty impressive for an event like this, considering when it was started. I know I just spent a few minutes ranting about what was essentially a history lesson of E3 and Summer Game Fest, but now let's revisit the question I intended to ask in this video. Are there too many gaming events? Now, you might be quick to say no, as you're more likely just a fan of games if you're watching this video, so you like seeing the latest and greatest no matter what. But I can't help but feel like things are getting a little out of hand at times, and that's what I wanted to explore when I was researching this video. As I said before, I got this idea from looking at a list of June's events from Gematsu's website, so let's start there. As you can see, June 7th, 8th, and 9th are all incredibly busy due to being a part of Summer Game Fest. In total, during just Summer Game Fest, which goes from June 7th to 10th officially, there are 13 events, and this is after removing things like the Honkai Star Rail presentation and Atlas FES since they're not related to Summer Game Fest, as well as counting multi-day events like IGN Live as one event for simplicity's sake. In the span of 4 days, there are 13 events. If it was spread evenly, it would be just about 3 events per day, but it doesn't quite balance out like that. On June 7th alone, if you're media covering Summer Game Fest in person, you've got one hell of a schedule here. First, you have IGN Live starting at 11 a.m. with exclusive interviews and coverage of games announced throughout the weekend. Then at 2 p.m., you have the main show hosted by Jeff Keighley, which goes from 2 to 4 p.m. Oh, but don't leave yet, because you also have Day of the Devs directly after Summer Game Fest at 4 p.m. and going for an hour. Before you even have time to ask if your day is over, you have the Devolver Direct starting at 5 p.m. and going for a measly 20 minutes. Now, you can enjoy a little dinner break, but not before Atlas hosts an exclusive broadcast for Metaphor ReFantazio at 6 p.m. for another half hour. Don't even get me started on time zone differences, because that's a whole other can of worms in terms of keeping up with industry news. All of this is to say, it must be absolutely exhausting to be a journalist and having to go to all these events for coverage. I truly feel bad for the ones that don't quite have the endurance to keep up with all of this news. I know I sure as hell wouldn't be able to. That's also just AAA stuff, by the way. Indie games are a whole other beast. In the month of June alone, we have 10 different indie showcases, with half of those just being in Summer Game Fest. You have showcases for women-led games, Latin American games, wholesome games, and even Yacht Club games have their own showcase because fuck it, we ball. Then you have the OTK Games Expo, which sure exists, because if there's a place I want to show my indie game, it's in tandem with a streamer org that gets its popularity from whatever controversy Ms. Kiff or Asmongold get into that week. Going outside of June for a moment, you have things like Nintendo's Indie World, and recently the III Initiative, which is meant to show indie games that have a larger budget, basically the equivalent of AAA games compared to third party. This may come as a hot take, but I feel like it's genuinely difficult to keep up with indie games purely because there are so many indie presentations. Now, let me be clear on this point. I can see why there are as many indie presentations as there are. Indie games, unlike AAA, don't have shareholders breathing down their necks to release games on a particular deadline or meeting a quota, nor do they have to deal with a lot of the rigmarole that comes with publishing through big companies like Nintendo or Sony. They could just publish their games on Steam, then publish on consoles digitally if they could afford the development license. The simple fact is that there are hundreds of indie games that exist at any given time, so understandably, it's not feasible to show them all off in one showcase, hence the need for so many. That didn't stop Best Indie Games on YouTube from trying his damn best. Nearly 3 hours of purely indie game announcements and updates for existing games, with the games featured totaling over 180. When I was doing research for this video, I was considering comparing lists of announcements from the different showcases to see how much overlap there was. But good lord, this one was so massive that a list of the announcements from that one showcase doesn't even exist, from what I could find. And I was not about to sit through 3 hours of that just to get the titles of all 180 plus games for this video, because that would have made this a nightmare to make. In the research I could mentally handle, there was almost no overlap between the Guerrilla Collective and OTK Expo showcases except for 2 games, which I found to be pretty surprising. It gets even crazier when I add the Next Indie Direct into the mix, with only 1 game being in both that and OTK showcase, with absolutely zero overlap between Next Indie and Guerrilla Collective showcases. As much as I want to add more of these and compare all of their announcement lists, that would be almost impossible for me to keep up with and track single-handedly, especially since, admittedly, I don't know how to scrape websites for information to streamline the process. If you want to try comparing all the indie showcases and announcements for overlap between presentations, go ahead and give it a go, and let me know when you find in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see what you find if you do. You know what showcases make no sense to me, though? Presentations that focus on a single game and nothing else. Sometimes I get it. Games with mass appeal can stand on their own 2 feet, like Mario games, but when you advertise a direct presentation for Call of Duty Black Ops 6, that's when I start to get a little annoyed. The way they teased this direct was also pretty lame. On Twitter, Xbox made a post saying that there would be a special direct for a particular game right after the Xbox showcase, censoring the title, with only a very obvious background image to leave us guessing what they could possibly be showing off at their big showcase. I hope it's a new Banjo game, son of a bitch. First off, if you're going to do an extended gameplay showcase of Black Ops 6, why make it part of the main show at all? That 25 minutes of gameplay could very easily be handed off to IGN so they can analyze it in real time on their show or something. Plus, what drastic gameplay changes are you making to the point where you can justify showing 25 whole minutes? Second, why would you make this the big mystery presentation? Like, wow, the video game series that releases an entry every year is getting a game this year? No f***ing way! If you're going to do a mystery direct, maybe do it for something that isn't incredibly predictable and something people are actually hyped about and want to see more of. There were several other games at the Xbox showcase that would have been perfect for this, like the Fable remake or Clair Obscur Expedition 33. That game got tons of positive attention. What also confuses me is games getting their own showcases, but they show basically everything there is to know about the game. These showcases typically do things like showing significant amounts of gameplay or giving a general gist of the story, which I find to be odd since don't they want you to experience the story for yourself? Atlas does a similar thing to this, most recently with Metaphor ReFantazio. In addition to a showcase a month ago, they decided to show another one at Summer Game Fest. This showcase focused on gameplay, specifically the archetypes featured in the game. I like a good gameplay trailer, but this seems a little excessive. With not only the trailer from a month ago showing off a lot about the core mechanics, now we have a whole 20 minutes of gameplay showing off all the archetypes in the game. If you want us to explore the archetype feature, why are you just laying out the details of every single one out for us? It becomes less of a showcase and more of a tutorial before we even get our hands on the game. The idea is to allow us to experiment with which archetypes we like playing as, while also opening the door to trying new party combinations and setups and configurations, but going through every archetype's details just kind of kills the creativity of it, because after watching the video, You now have kind of a preconceived notion about how you'll play the game as they demonstrated, rather than developing your own way to play the game yourself. Now, you might say, well, Mike, if you don't want to be spoiled on a game's features, don't watch the gameplay showcase. I understand that some people just don't watch trailers for games so they can experience it as genuinely as possible. That's totally fair. But at the same time, I think it's reasonable to expect a gameplay trailer to just explain the bare bones of how a game plays while leaving room for intrigue. Hell, I made a whole f***ing show about that exact train of thought, so I don't think I'm exactly alone in that thought. I guess in a way, I answered my own question. That when considering indie games in particular, there are these many gaming events for a reason. It may feel repetitive to have so many showcases for indie games in any given month, especially June when the big dogs are also making announcements, but at the end of the day, it does increase visibility for these games compared to throwing a few in a direct or a state of play. With a specialized indie presentation, you know your viewing audience will be far more positively receptive to indie games, so it makes sense that all of these are separate from the other presentations. And you know what? Stuff like the women-led showcase is great to have as a way of demonstrating how women are just as passionate about making games despite often being treated unfairly in the industry. So, in conclusion, I think while it's easy to feel overwhelmed at all the gaming events happening, my research for this video has shown me that this goes to show how vast the gaming industry truly is if you choose to look anywhere outside of just AAA. But what are your thoughts? Do you think that there are too many gaming events happening lately, or is stuff like Summer Game Fest the perfect storm of getting you hyped for game announcements? Because it feels like everything is all in a week or two of continuous announcements. Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to be it for me. Stay vibing and thriving, everyone. I will see you in the next one.